Two news and views with myself, Salailo Makwidi. The time is 8:35, and we'll be shifting gears now to what's happening here on the continent of Africa. A week after a dramatic coup attempt in Burkina Faso, the atmosphere remains tense and the power dynamics a bit fragile with the postponed army meetings. Reports of missing soldiers and military camps on high alert, the signs of internal unrest are unmistakable. What's more, the junta has accused foreign powers of interference and is rallying supporters to push back. All the while, the broader Sahel region continues to suffer deadly insurgencies and civilian unrest. Captain Ibrahim Traore's government, which came in a military takeover itself. It was a coup that saw President Ibrahim Traore in power right now, is now trying to root out both domestic dissent and what it calls external manipulation. But behind the rhetoric, Burkina Faso and the entire Sahel region is walking what one might consider a tight rope between sovereignty and chaos. And Ibrahim Traore has come out very strong when it comes to his sentiments, the future outlook of Burkina Faso and what he envisions it to be. A lot of people saying, well, that's the blueprint that the rest of the continent should be following. But yeah, we'll be unpacking all of that, this moments of danger and opportunity, and what almost reflects the continent and the direction that it should be taking, depending on whether or not you're a fan of Ibrahim Traore. There are people that think, well, he's a typical African leader, very loud, promises upon promises upon promises, has taken over through a military coup. There hasn't been announcement of a democratic election anytime soon. So yeah, it depends. It's a very polarizing conversation when it comes to Burkina Faso and Captain Ibrahim Traore. And I'm joined by Professor Mthunzi Mdawaba, a global business leader, strategist, and development expert. He's also the CEO of TZoro Global Advisory and Thuja, and he also chairs KasiKonnect and Kane Holdings. And we'll be tapping into his experience across governance, investment, and African development to assess what's really going on beneath the surface in Burkina Faso and what it means ultimately for the continent's democratic and economic future. Prof, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time, and welcome to News and Views.
Thank you, Salayalo. Good morning. And I suppose if there are people who are listening in the Sahel region, just in case they are also streaming in, because I also tried to share it with as many socials as possible. We should also say bonjour, al tous.
Oh, is this the part where I say merci?
You can just say merci beaucoup. It's okay.
Merci beaucoup. Prof, the issue of Burkina Faso and Ibrahim Traore has become a very, very polarizing one. There's been a lot. I think almost every week there's a new development happening in Burkina Faso. The latest one, obviously, being the Burkinabe's junta claiming a coup that was foiled and blaming both internal and external actors. From your perspective, how would you dissect and analyze Burkina Faso at this current moment under the leadership of Ibrahim Traore, who's been a very vocal, very leader which does not mince his words when it comes to the direction that he sees his country and ultimately the continent taking in the future?
Well, Salayalo, there's no doubt that things would be very tough in Burkina Faso for Ibrahim Traore. The reason things would be tough is because he's dared to look in the face and stare in the eyes the enemies of the past, the enemies of colonization. And he's dared to say he's not only doing away with them, but actually he's going to focus on the autonomy of the Burkinabe, the autonomy of Burkina Faso, and the independence of doing things by Burkinabe for Burkinabe. You would have seen that not only has it been rhetoric in the last few months, but he actually has implemented and has been true to his word, everything that he has done. He's refused to cooperate, as you know, completely with the previous colonizers, the French. He's refused to collaborate with the IMF and the World Bank. And of course, in doing so, it is not a surprise that he's facing the challenges that he's facing right now. It is a very revolutionary act. It's a very bold and brave step that he and his colleagues have taken. And so it is bound to continue being very difficult. And of course, in the Sahel region, he is with Mali and is with Niger, who all three of them having had coups to be able to ascend to power themselves. So I think that for me would be the context.
I want to focus on that. The point that you're just making now, on the region, the Sahel region. Why does it remain such a hot bed for military takeovers, and what's fundamentally failing in the governance structures that allows this kind of pattern to persist?
Well, that's a very good question, actually, because we use words like governance, and as soon as you use words like governance and democracy, it is assumed that anything else that does not follow the traditional mold of the westernized model is therefore not going to be the right way forward. I think the context for that region is that it was hugely colonized, same as we were, all of us, but we were colonized by different forces. With us, it was the Dutch and the English, and we've sort of followed a very characteristic, and when I say we, I mean South Africa and many other countries. So either you had a colonization by the French, or by the Portuguese, or by the English, and so on. And that region was previously colonized by the French. It has seen a huge kind of boiling a situation below the surface for a while, because things have not been working out the way people would expect them to, if they are to be able to grow their region. It has become very clear to them over time that they are being used, and every so-called democratic dispensation, every so-called governance-oriented situation has been steered and remote controlled from somewhere else. And when it's remote controlled from somewhere else, it therefore means that the beneficiaries of this so-called governance structure and so-called democracy is not benefiting the indigenous people of the Sahel region. It's not benefiting the indigenous people, in this case, of Burkina Faso. You would have had reports that ever since the coup by Ibrahim Traore and his colleagues, there's been huge economic improvement in Burkina Faso. There's been huge an upsurge of a confidence in the Burkinabe people believing in themselves. There's been an upsurge in the region, although the tension is huge. And of course, the dangers are high, because why are the dangers high? Because they are doing that which nobody would dare do. Is it correct to have coups? Well, that is a matter we can debate, I think, on a different day, because, it's very easy to judge. It's very easy to stand and look at people and cast your view and criticize. But it's very difficult when you are hearing reports from people who live there. And I've had the good fortune and privilege of being to many of these places in Africa and the world, and to know that it is not sustainable to have the so-called democratic and so-called governance structures that have been there. So there are times when what is a coup may not necessarily be a bad thing. It may be a good thing. In the case of Ibrahim Traore, he has risen to be the force for Africa and an inspiration for Africa that everybody now aspires to. You can imagine that this makes a lot of people unhappy, especially those people who have stood to benefit unfairly for all these years at the expense of the Burkinabe people.
And again, speaking of people that are unhappy when it comes to this newfound independent voice coming out of Burkina Faso, would be the West, essentially. The Burkinabe junta, as it were, has accused Western interference and has labeled this newfold coup something that can be attributed to them, which ultimately saw them pivot more towards Russian military alliances, Russian business interests. We saw just earlier this week that announcement of this big mining deal in Burkina Faso, which was signed to a Russian company. The next question on that would be, are we witnessing a new Cold War on the continent? The East and the West, its interference on Africa's internal affairs, particularly with Burkina Faso being, at the front of this. Are we witnessing this East-West tug of war essentially unfolding in front of us? And what does it mean ultimately for countries like Burkina Faso and those in the Sahel region, which still have a lot of influence from the former colonial masters?
Well, you've asked a very packed and very pregnant question. So when you use Cold War, we've got to be careful, of course, because Cold War was the sort of the label used to describe the tensions between the Americans and the Russians, the Soviet Union, from 1947 to 1991. And a Cold War is normally a state of conflict between nations that does not involve direct military action, right? And is normally pursued primarily through economic and political actions, propaganda, acts of espionage, and so on and so on, right? But I do understand, though, what you mean in this geopolitical sense, right? Because the forces that are behind, or the forces that have been eradicated and pushed out in the Sahel region, would, I suppose, be, as a group of countries, be having their own Cold War conflict with, the Russians, for example. You've just mentioned that the alliances now are with Russians. The big deals that are being signed are with Russians and so on. So, for a while, Silayolo, the world has been going through some huge geopolitical shifts. And the geopolitical complexities are such that you now have a world that is no longer ruled by the G7 or the G20 or the G whatever, right? It's good to be with the Gs. And South Africa, as you know, is hosting the G20 as we speak. But the alternative that is presented by the BRICS, for example, which is ever growing, which as we speak is now bigger than the G7 in terms of its power as a bloc, right? And you've got now the BRICS Plus, where many countries are applying to be part of that. You see a world somehow perceived as being in turmoil, but actually it's not really turmoil, other than the fact that it is revolutionary, disruptive geopolitical shifts that people never believed would happen. And of course, the ones who were erstwhile in power, the ones who've always had it quite control, are in shock, are desperate, and will do whatever they can to be able to keep their pre-existing hegemony and the control they've had on the world, particularly the developing world like Africa, parts of the Middle East, parts of Latin America. All the developing world is discovering itself, is finding a way of coming out of this colonial, what is the word I'm looking for? Almost like indoctrination, or psychological hold, where now they are seeing that, no, wait a minute, there is an alternative. And yes, the alternatives are difficult and the alternatives are more dangerous, but you know what? It's worth doing. So there's nothing like freeing the human spirit. When the human spirit experiences liberation, it doesn't matter how much suffering there must be. It doesn't matter how much danger there must be. So this is what is happening. The whole world is changing. And Ibrahim Traore, may he be protected. May God, may Allah protect him, this man. Because this is a man who's demonstrated that he shall not be controlled by remote forces. He shall refuse to be controlled. He's only 37 years old. And which for me proves what some of us have been saying, that we need to allow our young people to take control. We need to allow our young people to enter the stage of politics and enter the stage of economic dispensation, because us, the old folk, have got so much toxicity and have got so much colonial arrest that we don't even realize that we don't know how to look at alternatives. We need young people who can work with us hand in hand. I'm not saying get rid of the old people, but the old people, if they don't allow the young people to come in, the old people are going to be kicked out by the young people, because it's enough. They've been waiting for too long. They are trying to be humble. They are trying to be respectful. They're trying to be civil, but we're not allowing them to be so, right? So for me, this is something that all of us as Africans, as developing countries, including Latin America, as I say, and the Middle East, we need to look at this and say, hold on. If Burkina Faso can do it, why can't we do it? I mean, for me, I want to be very clear. I'm not propagating coups. I'm not saying let's have coups. I'm saying, though, let us wake up and smell the coffee. Let us understand that if we don't allow change, as uncomfortable as change is, as uncomfortable as it will be, we are leaving the young people no choice but to take up the cudgels and do it by force. And, I'm one of those people who always quotes, there's a quote that is now used by Beyonce a lot these days, but I can't remember who the original was. That, if power is never given, power is taken.
I want to come to, I think, a country that suffers or doesn't quite do well when it comes to the integration of young people in spaces of governance. Us here, South Africa. How should our government, how should our leadership and our country as a whole interact with this new leader emerging out of Burkina Faso? There hasn't been, I'm not sure if I missed it, any official recognition of Ibrahim Traore and this new leadership of Burkina Faso from our own government. There are no meetings being mentioned, or the backing of Ibrahim Traore, or I don't know, just his role and the effect that it might have on the continent as a whole. How does South Africa deal with this? A democratic South Africa, which has to deal with a coup, leaded country. What's our role as this big voice on the continent?
Well, Sulailo, again, you've asked big questions. You've asked about youth integration, then you've asked about South Africa's role, and you've asked about how we should approach it. So let's start like this. South Africa has its own challenges, right? Like every other country, we have challenges. We need to deal with them in a responsible and collaborative manner. That's very important. We are known as the country that had the most successful, and we must put this in parentheses because I don't know about successful, bloodless coup. Right? But there's no doubt that our transition was bloodless. It was a coup without a war. Okay? But it was a coup, nevertheless. So we need to be very careful. And also, amongst the challenges we have, we are busy being attacked by Trump and Elon Musk and their friends and whatever. So we got to be very careful. But South Africa is a very important kingmaker in the geopolitical world. That's why Trump is making a huge mistake, and this is a discussion for a different day, and to be attacking South Africa, because we shall come out of this looking good. But of course, there are things we need to do right. What are the things we need to do right? One of them is to allow young people to come into the fore and lead, is to allow young people to have their voices being listened to have young people participating very actively in the revolutionary changes that our country needs, and making sure that we are also able to shed our colonial cloaks that are blinding us from the realities of what is possible and what we can be able to do. What do we need to do? We need to make sure that we have an economic dispensation that is different. I saw now the other day, there's an article saying we need to make sure that everybody goes into agriculture and aquaculture. I am busy with quite a huge agriculture, aquaculture project that will be announced hopefully soon. Okay, but I'm working with young people, I'm working with communities, I'm working with people who are previously not allowed to come in. For example, you've got young people who've got licenses in aquaculture, who've got licenses to do things in agriculture, but they're not funded. They're not given the money to do those things. So what's the point of having a license if you're not going to have the funding and access to money to be able to do it? So we need to have a situation where we have sustainable enterprises. We need to have a situation, where we recognize that gender-based violence, which is perpetrated on young people, particularly young women, all those things we must do. If we don't do away with those things and listen to the suggestions and recommendations by young people and work with young people, allow them to work and not kick the ladder and block them, we shall have the same problem that everybody is having. Of course, South Africa is a very sophisticated, again, in parentheses, kind of country, has far more complex realities than many African countries. But nothing is impossible when people are tired. I remember there was that thing, the Arab Spring, many years ago. And I shared this with some of the then ministers, and in fact, I can tell you straight, it was one guy called Gwede Mantashe. And I told him at an airport in Cape Town about 2015, maybe years ago. I can't remember when it was. And I said to him, listen, we are losing the plot. And the ANC was still very powerful at the time. I said, we're losing the plot. Our kids in schools are being taught things that are strange by people that are strange. And we are not going in there and making sure that we've got competent people who teach the right history and whatever you. But also the young people are getting exhausted, are getting tired. Look at the Arab Spring. This will happen to us. He said to me, it will never happen. He says, not in this country. He says, the problem with some of you guys is that you don't know how to discipline your young people. He says, in my family, if I'm a Pirates fan or a Kaizer Chiefs fan, they know my kids, they must be Pirates fans. And therefore, I suppose he was talking about the fact that they must be ANC fans. And I said, well, I don't know. It seems very simplistic to me and very ignorant, very naive. Time
and
would
very
have shown.
arrogant and very arrogant.
Excessively arrogant, and this is the problem. That's why we are where we are now. You've seen this arrogance again recently with the vet situation, where everybody says no, right? But what do? They go and force it. Round one, they lose. Round two, they still go and do it. But you can see there's a groundswell of saying no. People are going to court, right? And it's a sign of the times when you're going to have the DA and the EFF working together. Whoever thought that was possible? So if you say Arab Spring and things like that will not happen here, and if you think we cannot have coups in South Africa, you might just be shocked. People are getting tired. People are getting exhausted. People have been abused for too long. People are not being listened to. Some of us who want to effect change and have impact are pushed to the side and marginalized. Why? Because we talk about truths that Ibrahim Traore is talking about, truths that are uncomfortable, and people don't want to listen. So that's my view.
No, definitely. I think we're going to on that note, Prof. Thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure listening to you and your very, very valuable insights. And I'll end it how you started it. Au revoir.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir. A bientôt. A bientôt means see you again sometime, because Sala Media is a friends of mine. So even when sometimes I think you must just notify me on time. When I'm
definitely will, Prof. Thank you so much.
Your call in a motor car in a parking lot, but I'm happy to have joined you. Thank you very much.
The pleasure is all ours. That was Professor Mthunzi Mdawaba. Very valuable insights. You can interact with us. What are your thoughts on Ibrahim Traore and the direction that he's taking Burkina Faso? Do you feel he's the quintessential new age African leader that is needed on the continent? Or you feel he represents what has been, the quintessential African leaders of old, many that have come through, whether it's through coups or the liberation from former colonial powers, coming up with all kinds of promises. We'll be independent, we'll work out our own affairs internally, but ultimately the fruits being the same. People that rig elections, go for years on years on years, not participating in democratic processes within their respective countries. I know a lot of presidents come into mind when I speak of that. Or Ibrahim Traore represents a new age African leader, one that's independent, one that sees his country as equals to anyone in the world, one that commands and demands respect from the rest of the globe, and one that has choices. That's under no illusion, as the prof puts it there, the toxicity of the past, but is looking ahead to the future. Yeah, you can interact with us. Do you think South Africa maybe needs an Ibrahim Traore kind of figure, someone that's very outspoken, someone that's not shy or scared to voice out their opinions and the directions that they wish the country to see? But yeah, very, very critical and valuable insights there from Professor Mthunzi Mdawaba on the instability across the African continent and whether political and economic ties go back to the question of governance, global influence, and ultimately Africa's own fractured integration. And as he rightly pointed out, the future of the continent cannot be outsourced. It must be claimed from within, and with bold leadership and clear vision from what many might say a figure like Ibrahim Traore poses. So yeah, appreciate his time and his expertise this morning. We want to hear your voice. What do you think of Ibrahim Traore? How do you think South Africa should go about interacting with him and the figure that he presents? Should we not recognize him? He's not a democratically elected president because South Africa prides itself on that. We pride ourselves on democracy and, well, elections and the will of the people. And just based on that, do you think there should be no, interactions with Ibrahim Traore? He's an illegitimate president, according to a lot of people. Or it's leaders like him that can take the continent of Africa forward. Very military inclined, very hard when it comes to his stance on foreign powers, and a leader that looks like he's not scared. Okay? He's not scared of anything and of anyone. We have a comment coming from Abdul Razak Ishmailov, and he says, nationalize the mines and protect Comrade Ibrahim Traore at all costs. Do you share the same sentiments? Do you think he should be protected? He represents a new age Africa that all of us need to start looking into. Really, really interesting. And I think the figure that is Ibrahim Traore will kind of tell us exactly if Africa is ready for that kind of leadership, especially coming from someone that's so young, what, 37 years of age? We've always blamed the old heads, the older African leaders, and how they ultimately gave the continent nothing after what they call liberation from colonial masters. And Ibrahim Traore will kind of be a litmus test, I suppose, for everyone on the continent. Is it time that younger, more vibrant leaders are given opportunities to lead? And this is something that I think, we touched on with Professor. The fact that South Africa itself has been struggling when it comes to integrating young people into power. How many leaders are in parliament that can we say are, fresh faced and represent, the future of South Africa and what it should look like? So yeah, interesting times ahead. And South Africa should be looking with a close and keen eye, because who says there can't be coups in South Africa? Who says we can't see something that might resemble an Arab Spring across the SADC region? Eh? Zimbabwe, are you watching? Are you listening? Mozambique, you've had your own issues this past year when it comes to how you handled your elections. South Africa, highest youth unemployment rate in the world. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. News and views continues after this.